This is the episode number 34 of the Energy Transition Series. Good afternoon, Irina Slav. Good morning, David Blackmon.
Hello.
Good morning.
Our topic for today is the unpredictable OPEC, or predictable, I don't know. And let me share, please, a very interesting chart showing the prices in the last 3 months. So nowadays we have $85 Brent per barrel.
Yes.
But 3 months before we had 100 and something. So this is very curious how things can. So is it possible to guess what OPEC members are planning, Irina?
Well, judging by the reports coming in over the last few days, they're planning to cut production. Whether or not it will be an actual cut is a different matter because at least since June, they have been undershooting their targets by more than 2 million barrels daily. So I think that even if OPEC Plus agrees this production cut, which they probably will, it will not be an actual reduction in output. It will just bring them closer to, it will narrow the gap between actual production and their production quotas, which they obviously can't reach for various reasons.
Because the world's are around 100 million barrels a day, and OPEC is 30 or something like that.
Around 30, yeah.
So if they cut 1 million barrels, there's no effect in the whole process.
Well, if they actually cut another 1 million barrels of production, this will be tough for global supply. If they cut it from actual production numbers rather than from their target production numbers, this will squeeze supply. But as I said, I think they'll be cutting from their target production rather than from actual production. But we may yet be surprised, of course.
And David, probably United States import from OPEC oil. I'm not sure about that. And how do you see this situation?
Yeah, I mean, the United States gets most of its imports from OPEC Plus members, although a big portion of what we import comes down from Canada, on trains and trucks and some pipelines. Would be a lot more coming by pipeline if they hadn't canceled Keystone XL, but that's another thing. But yeah, the question is going to become, as Irina said, whether or not OPEC Plus adjusts its targets. And Dan Pickering was on CNBC this morning, and he said he expects that that OPEC Plus, when it meets for the first time face-to-face meeting in many months, by the way, I think since the COVID pandemic this week, he thinks they're going to actually adjust their targets as well downward to try to better reflect what their countries are actually delivering. I think, Irina, wasn't the deficit for August like 2.8 million barrels a day?
2.85 for August, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's a huge amount of oil. That's almost 3% of global demand undershooting their targets. So, yeah, I think it's high time they've undershot those targets every month for the last year, more than the last year. And so it is time for them to probably readjust those targets downward. Pickering said that he thinks the actual cut in actual production, from what he's hearing, might amount to about 500,000 barrels a day, which, would be significant. That's a significant cut. I'm not sure it justifies the run up in prices that we're seeing this morning. Brent was over $88 when I looked a little bit ago, and WTI was back over 83. WTI got as low as 76 last week. So that's a pretty significant rise in anticipation of this meeting. And I honestly think we may see an even bigger cut than what's in the media, because the economy globally, particularly in Europe, but also in the United States, is weakening very quickly, and that's going to ultimately mean a pretty significant drop in oil demand. And if OPEC Plus really wants prices, if they want the Brent price at $100, they're going to have to do more than just cut production by 500,000. So this is going to be a very interesting week.
And is Russia pushing this million barrel cut right now, or
well,
other
those were
countries?
the original reports that Russia was going to propose this, and then Reuters started reporting, quoting OPEC delegates that they will be discussing this. Of course, all members of OPEC Plus are interested in higher prices, including Russia, because the higher the prices, the higher the price for Russian oil, even if it sells at a discount because of sanctions. And it's going to get interesting because I just saw that the European Union is discussing the next package of sanctions, whatever's left of their sanction options. Apparently, there is something left, and they're going to discuss oil price caps on Russian crude.
Oh, sure. Why not?
Yeah, it's just 3 months or less than 3 months until an oil embargo against Russia comes into effect. But sure, let's impose price caps. So prices could jump, further up for now. But I wouldn't set great store by these fluctuations in prices because, as David pointed out, they will have to cut a lot more than what they say to effect a fundamental change in supply. And then let's remember that the recent decline in oil prices, which has been going on for the last 3 months, Brent lost about a quarter of its value in the third quarter. But that was not because there was more supply. That was because of growing fears of recession, which may well turn out to be very well founded, and we will probably see a lot of countries, especially in Europe, go into a recession. So these fears were very justified, and this will affect demand. But just how much it will affect demand remains to be seen. As you know, power generators switching from gas to oil, that's a whole new source of oil demand that nobody would have anticipated just a year ago. So it's an interesting picture.
Yeah. David, who are, let's see, allies, and who are, let's see, the opposite position of OPEC in terms of non-OPEC members? Who are the allies of them?
The non-OPEC members that are big oil-producing countries.
Yes.
Well, you start with the United States and Canada, obviously. They're the biggest that aren't in OPEC. Trying to think what other significant oil producers are not. Brazil's OPEC
Brazil is
Plus,
very
right?
small, only 3 million barrels a day.
But that's
it's
very
not
significant.
only, that's a lot.
Yeah, and the internal consumption is about 2 or 2 and something. So
So Brazil's a very significant exporter, and Argentina has a growing oil production capacity. Guyana,
coming strong,
is actually over 700,000 a day now, I think, from the ExxonMobil operation down there, and that's going to grow very rapidly over the next few years. So Guyana is going to become an oil powerhouse over the next 5 years. But really, the United States remains the biggest producer on earth. Saudi Arabia could be if it wanted to be. And of course, the U.S. industry continues to grow production despite a stagnant rig count, and recoveries per well in the Permian Basin, despite some reports during August that recoveries were declining in the Permian. That has not actually been the case. Recoveries per well continue to rise in the Permian Basin. And so U.S. production is probably going to grow about 500,000 barrels a day by the end of the year. And So, the U.S. is really helping to create a bit of a bubble on the oil markets right now, and that's what OPEC Plus is trying to address. And I think, honestly, I think they'll address it pretty firmly this week.
You mentioned United States. In July, United States produced 11.8 million barrels per day.
Yeah.
Consumption is 20. So
Mhm.
the amount of imports is very big, very huge.
Yeah, that's just crude oil production, and then of course we have several million barrels of condensate production per day too, from natural gas wells, and it all total we end up importing 5 to 6 million barrels a day, which is very significant. That's net imports because we export 2 to 3 million barrels a day, and so your gross imports are probably closer to 9 million a day here in the United States. So it's very big part of our oil consumption, and it remains extremely important for the shipping lanes to remain open for the United States economy.
Some countries in Europe are replacing gas by oil in some application, few applications. I don't know which ones. You know which ones?
Power generation, as far as I understand.
Yeah, many
because
of the
oil is
plants
cheaper right now.
Yeah, Germany has quite a few plants that can switch from natural gas to oil, and they do from time to time. And New England in the United States, the northeastern United States burns an awful lot of fuel oil during the winter months, and
Denmark is turning on its oil-fueled power plants right now. Denmark, the wind power, capital of Europe.
And there is an oil price article today. I don't remember the author is Kinami something.
Kimani, Alex Kimani.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
He shows several different projections, forecasts about companies, service providers. I mean, consulting companies, showing when the oil will, let's see, reduce the importance in the world. It's impressive, the difference of visions. Some consulting are thinking that it will increase to 111 million barrels a day. Others to 50 or 30 million barrels a day. What do you see in this confusion of visions from consulting companies?
Well, so go ahead, me or Irina?
You go ahead.
Well, I mean, so much of peak oil theory is politically motivated. The prophets of peak oil theory right now are left-wing environmental advocates for the most part. And they're the ones who are projecting, oil consumption to be 30 million barrels a day by 2050. The people who really know something about how the oil markets work and what's really going to happen in the energy space between now and then are the ones predicting, demand to continue to rise between now and then. And peak oil theory has been around really since the late 1800s. I was able to trace it back to 1886 a few years ago. It's always wrong, and it's probably going to continue to be wrong for the rest of this century and maybe longer than that, because the physical limitations and Irina has written a lot about this recently. I've written a lot about it. The only way to actually have an energy transition in the Western world is for the United States and Europe and Canada to go back into the hard rock mining business in a very big way, a huge way. And the same environmentalists who want this energy transition are going to oppose the opening of every one of those mines. We're going to need 300 new copper mines alone, copper, between now and 2050. These enormous open pit mines that the environmentalists hate for this energy transition to move ahead. And then you have lithium and cobalt and vanadium and all these other minerals that solar and wind power have to have. So people just aren't thinking this all the way through. It's really going to become one of the worst political fiascos in world history between now and 2030, when people begin to really wake up to how what a failure the transition is destined to become. So oil, we're going to be continuing to use oil for a long time, and probably more oil. We'll need more oil every day than we do right now in the year 2050. And the only alternative to it is a complete collapse in the global economy and going back to subsistence level life for everyone on Earth. And maybe people will tolerate that. I'm not smart enough to know.
Do you think?
Yeah, let me show a question from the audience. Can you read?
Very
Oh,
true, yes.
uh, he's talking about inflation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, he's right. He's right. Central bank monetary policy has been instrumental about the current inflation situation. Yeah, it's increased demand. Let's also mention all those demand stimulus measures that governments have been putting in place, which analysts have called out as utterly stupid, because on the one hand, you're trying to depress demand for fossil fuels, for oil and gas, but on the other hand, you're subsidizing greater consumption.
Yeah. Yeah,
These prices have become, unbearably high, and instead of leaving them unbearably high, which would be politically, dangerous, they're subsidizing fuels. Well, yeah, they have to choose between political survival and, sticking with the transition script. And for now, politicians seem to be choosing, sanity and political survival.
David, what's the reason United States are selling strategic storage oil?
Well, it's an effort by the president and Democrats in our Congress to try to keep gasoline prices from going too high before the November elections. It's had some success, I think, but of course now we're seeing gasoline prices in the United States begin to rise pretty dramatically over the last few weeks. And there's every reason to expect that to continue now. And so that's going to be very politically harmful to whatever party's in power whenever gasoline prices go up ahead of an election. And so, yes, President Biden was willing to take our strategic petroleum reserve down to the lowest levels in 30 years for purely political purposes. That reserve exists for a national emergency, and $5 gasoline prices are not pleasant and they're inconvenient, but they are not a national emergency. And so the only explanation is pure politics. And, he's not the first president who has done that with the SPR, and he won't be the last.
And now they have to replenish the SPR.
Yes, at some point we're going to have to start buying all back, and of course that withdrawal of 1 million barrels a day was supposed to have ended as of October 1st, but they haven't completed the program yet, so it's going to linger on for another few weeks. But then, yes, I mean, they're either going to have to leave it at that depleted level, which is right around 300 million barrels now total, which it had been over 700 million barrels before Biden got started with it. And so when they start buying oil back, that's going to take it off of the global market and create an even bigger deficit than you have already. And it's just really a dumb policy that in the long run is going to be very destructive to the American economy.
For sure. China is probably coming back to or reopen market very soon. We expect that. And at the same time, there are some banning processes against Russia. That's a provider of oil. How do you see Russia and China in this game?
Well, they're clearly very close partners. China has been one of the biggest buyers of Russian oil, sanctioned Russian oil, and it probably will continue to buy Russian oil, whatever happens in Europe with sanctions. So China is benefiting from the sanction regime on Russian oil. And it will be probably exporting more fuels, especially if the diesel shortage continues, which it probably will with all the refinery closures during the pandemic, especially in the West, in Europe and the United States. So China is a winner, but China is a long-term planner. So I'm not surprised. I mean, it's not being irrational and frantic, unlike some governments I could mention, but I won't because I'm trying to be polite. So, yeah, China is emerging as one clear winner of the current situation. Whatever happens, even with the further lockdowns because of their zero COVID policies, sooner or later, I hope COVID will either, weaken enough to not warrant more lockdowns, or they will find some other way to return their economy on the strong growth path. But they know how to plan.
David, what's your vision about International Energy Agency related to this issue of volume of oil production and consumption, and at the same time prices? What do you see with International Energy Agency?
Well, I consider the IEA to be a pretty useless agency and run by a bunch of buffoons, and so I don't really think they have any, real influence or major role to play in this. It's all about OPEC Plus and whether or not it can retain their desired influence over oil prices. The OPEC Plus alliance has been a really interesting thing to watch for the last 4 years, because they really had a great deal of success before COVID in getting the price where they wanted it. Their initial target was $65 Brent, and they got it into that range and kept it there pretty consistently until COVID hit. And then they, it fell apart briefly when Russia and Saudi Arabia had their eruption in March of 2020. And they really haven't been able to exert control over the price market that that is the reason for that alliance to exist. And it operates completely independently of the IEA. Fatih Birol doesn't really have anything to say about what they do. Well, he says a lot, but he just doesn't have any real influence over them. Irina probably has her own views on this, and I can't wait to hear them.
They're pretty much the same as yours, David. There is no huge difference. But they're not entirely useless. They're a great source of entertainment. You have to agree.
They are.
Yeah.
They used to be a great source of information too, but that's kind of all gone up.
Once upon a time,
Yeah.
Very good. So, do we expect that this week OPEC announced some good news for us?
Good news, depending on how you're betting on oil, and if you're betting
Which
on
side
oil.
are you? Okay.
I'm only a consumer, and I am expecting bad news for me as a consumer of oil products.
Yeah, and I think it may be worse news than anyone's currently expecting, really.
That's right. Worse news, no doubt.
They have a tight grip on oil prices.
Thank you so much for this fantastic conversation today, David and Irina.
Thank you.
Thank you. Y'all have a wonderful week.
You too.
Bye-bye.
See ya. Bye-bye.